So I'll start with the intro at EDC, and then we'll get into how EDC is involved in mass timber. So EDC is a quasi-governmental agency. Basically, we're working to ensure that New York City's economy is vibrant, inclusive, and there's a few ways that we work. So on the one hand, we are a builder. We're building neighborhoods. That's residential, commercial, industrial, even retail spaces. My team is more on the innovation sector front. We're run programs that are helping kind of sectors that are important to the economy. So tech, life sciences, the green economy, which is my focus. We are developing infrastructure, so everything from ports and ferries to big logistics hubs around the city. We do develop and run those, and then we are have a data analysis arm that's really about strengthening business confidence and reporting on trends in New York City's economy. Even if you have not heard EDC or if you know EDC, I think it's hard to wrap your head around how big its reach is. There are over 200 properties around the city that are managed by EDC. It adds up to about 64 million square feet of real estate. We also are building all the time, about 170 capital projects worth about $9 billion that are either under construction or about to be. And then over 400 programs and initiatives that are all about growing jobs, expanding businesses here in New York. And so on the green economy front, early last year, the city EDC put out this report called the Green Economy Action Plan. It has over 60 commitments and investments about growing jobs in the green economy, which is a lot focused on the building sector in New York and on the transportation sector. There are about 150,000 jobs that are in the green economy today. That's about 3% of jobs in New York City. We expect that to more than double by 2040, and there'll be over 380,000 jobs within the green economy. So all the initiatives that came out of this plan, including an initiative around mass timber, is really what my team works on. People may have heard of EDC in the context as a builder or as an asset manager, but really on the programmatic side, where I focus with the green economy, part of what we do is help pilots get off the ground. That could be kind of new climate tech and giving them space to test out and demonstrate their products on our assets. Could be kind of less new tech like mass timber, which has been around for a while, but really giving space to try out the product in a real environment. We are also supporting regulatory wayfinding, and by that I mean New York has lots of regulations at the local level. Most of them are about safety, and we will help climate tech companies or climate tech projects navigate the fire department, the buildings department, and make sure that their projects can come to fruition. And then lastly, like I said, we have a big real estate kind of portfolio, so we are using our procurement power, our capital construction projects to scale some of the climate technologies that we're most excited about. So on to how this relates to mass timber. We run a program or a couple programs under the umbrella of the Climate Innovation Studios. Two of them are run directly by EDC and programs that I manage, the Mass Timber Studio and the Resilient Energy Studio, which is really focused on battery energy storage. And then DOT runs a studio as well, really looking for these new climate tech projects. The goals of the projects, of the studios, are to really accelerate the deployment of new climate tech, to expose to the agencies, mostly the regulatory agencies, about these newer technologies. Broader than that, we're trying to really inform changes to the regulatory environment, making it easier for projects that are deploying climate tech to actually come to fruition in New York, and then try to, as much as we can, facilitate partnerships that are necessary across industry, not just with these projects and the government regulators. So the Mass Timber Studio, really there's 4 pieces to it. One will actually identify projects, real mass timber construction projects in New York City, and help them, or pick ones that we think are kind of catalytic. We think that the completion of this project will help to mass timber to scale up in New York City. And I guess I should take a step back, but I guess the other speakers will speak more about it. Mass timber is really beneficial because it is kind of lower embodied carbon than traditional building materials like concrete and steel. Embodied carbon, the way I think about it is, so if operational carbon is what it takes to run the building, your HVAC, your lighting, embodied carbon is the carbon that's actually embedded in the building material itself and comes from the construction or the deconstruction of the project. So mass timber is more sustainable to use, and for architects, contractors who know how to use it, they can actually build their project faster and, if not cheaper, at the same cost to timber or concrete and steel. So we select projects that we're going to put into the studio. We'll have monthly technical assistance with the projects, and our Woodworks, which is a mass timber kind of expert, they are providing technical assistance to the teams. In addition, we bring in the fire department and the buildings department to meet with these teams monthly, answering questions they have about the building code, helping them as they design their projects. We have 2 industry roundtables as part of the studio where we bring together everyone in person, kind of bring up the main issues that are impeding mass timber from being deployed in New York, and then hopefully collaboratively come up with solutions between government and the project teams. And then at the end, we'll have something to share out, lessons learned from this studio, whether through our events and through a report, to make sure that it's not just these projects that are being advanced, but it's the broader industry. So I'll give a flavor for some of the projects. We've run 2 cohorts of this studio, so you can see these are aesthetically really pleasing projects. These 2 are actually public projects, which is even cooler. The one on the left is a project in the Bronx, a rec center that has a mass timber structure. You can see here the basketball court or the gymnasium, and then this project has actually received permits from the Department of Buildings, is moving forward with the construction process as we speak. And then on the right is another mass timber structure by the Brooklyn Public Library. This is replacing the New Lots branch in Brooklyn, and they too are working on their building permit right now, hopefully advancing to construction soon. And then the second cohort, which we just launched earlier this year, another 7 new projects all around the city, almost hitting almost every borough. And again, it's a mix of public and private projects. There's residential, there's some more community buildings, institutional buildings. Some of these projects you may have heard about. The New York Climate Exchange is the big campus on Governor's Island. They're planning to build one of their buildings with a mass timber structure. A lot of them are located in environmental justice communities, so this is not just a product for high end. They're also, this is something that we think could scale across New York City. And then we chose a mix of some new construction ground up, but some adaptive reuse. There's an adaptive reuse of the School out in Queens, the Gananu Academy, trying to layer over a building that was partially destroyed by a superstorm, and that project is going through some of the regulatory challenges I mentioned. Of the building code says one thing, they may be more strict than what other cities require, and so really figuring out what they have to do to design their building to meet the codes in New York. And I guess I'll just wrap by saying, feel free, EDC wants to support mass timber, not just in its projects, not just in the studio, but broadly. So if there are people that want to chat, I'm happy to connect you to people at EDC who are either building these projects. I failed to mention we actually do have a project that is in design right now in Staten Island. It's actually participating in the studio. It's going to be the largest residential mass timber project in New York City, about 500 units of housing on the Stapleton waterfront. So feel free to reach out and happy to chat.
I work out of the New York office. Gensler, I'm going to skip ahead for a second, actually. Too far. There we go. So Gensler is maybe arguably the largest architecture firm on earth. We have 57 offices across the globe. We are made up of 6,000 designers. We're designing about 1 billion square feet of space on an annual basis, and we've been around since 1965. So Gensler is massive, and I'm gonna jump back to where I was gonna start. But I am one of the founding members of our climate action and sustainability studio, which is, sits within the climate action and sustainability practice area, which is one of the 33 specialized practice areas that exist within Gensler. And as a dedicated sustainability studio, this is very much our mission. The goal is to turn the goals and commitments of our clients into tangible actions that result in impacts such as the reduction of carbon emissions, improvements in human health and ecosystems, and more circular building practices. So I do want to just take a minute and say I work with a remarkable team of people that are committed to this cause, and they have a really unique combination of backgrounds, as you can see on the left, and really just pretty singular skill sets and brilliant minds. But our studio's work is categorized into 3 main project types. So we do sort of your typical certification project, your LEED certification, your WELL certification, things of that nature. We also do what we consider strategy projects. So these are things like design guidelines, design standards, sort of regulations for clients of how their spaces are meant to be designed and built. And then we also do a lot of analytics work, which I will talk about a little further on in this deck, but those are things like life cycle assessment, daylight analysis, glare analysis, things like that, energy modeling. So to give you a little background on myself, I very much came out of design. Both my undergrad and my graduate degrees were focused on interior design, but during and after graduate school, I worked as a researcher at the Parsons Healthy Materials Lab, which is a research and design lab that focuses on educating the industry and the public at large about potential hazards that are present in very common building materials. And they work primarily on low-income housing as their project typology, because this is where you're seeing sort of the highest instances of the sort of worst quality materials because they are the cheapest. And you're also seeing impacts to fence-line communities from the production of these materials as well as the disposal of these materials. And so while I worked there, I both worked on the product research side as well as the education and training that they have. They have a bunch of courses if anybody is interested in learning more about what they focus on. But so I helped develop some of their material collections as well as their first low embodied carbon collection, which, Jesse, thank you for the very concise definition of what embodied carbon is. So that work is largely how I came to be at Gensler, and how I came to be involved in the formation of the Climate Action Studio. So Gensler is very actively working to shift the built environment towards net zero carbon emissions, both operational and embodied. And one of the ways in which we approach this issue is through the materials that we specify on our projects. And I think, similar to the EDC, we recognize that making better material selections was critical, albeit complex, and that the goal of achieving this, we're really uniquely positioned to have impact because of our size. So as I sort of already showed, we have 57 offices. There's 6,000 people working at Gensler across the globe, and 1 billion square feet per year. So sort of by that logic, Gensler is not just the largest architecture firm, we're also probably the largest specifier of building materials on the design and architecture side. So this means we have a really remarkable ability to influence the production of and demand for sustainable materials. And so I am going to walk you through a few of the ways in which we're doing this. The goal really being to drive down emissions associated with the built environment via these sustainable materials and to have an impact. So to break down our approach into 3 parts, The first section, I'll talk about how you get 6,000 people to change how they specify materials and what they specify. And then I will walk you through how we track carbon emissions throughout the design phase and construction so that we ensure that the decisions that we put in place are actually happening and those reductions are occurring. And then sort of what we're doing to divert materials from landfill during demolition. All right, so starting with how do you get a firm of our size to transition to specifying more materials? The really simple answer is you create a standard for your projects. So a standard is just like, this is how you do it. And that's exactly what we did. So the Gensler Product Sustainability Standards, which we typically refer to just by its acronym GPS, these are a set of product-specific standards that establish both required and market-leading sustainability attributes. So currently, we have requirements for 18 of the highest impact and highest volume products that we specify on our projects. So, and there are also 5 impact areas where the criteria are organized. There are 2 levels of performance. So we have a Gensler standard level and then a market differentiator level. And then this standard is being applied to all of our projects across the US, Canada, Europe, and the UK. So I know that we tend to use a lot of like internal jargon that maybe doesn't really translate to something that makes sense. So I feel like this is always just like a really helpful breakdown of understanding what it is that we're actually talking about. So what it is, what it isn't. It's a comprehensive set of sustainability criteria ranging from carbon to human health impacts. So this is not just a set of embodied carbon targets. We're focused on materials that we, Gensler, specify. We are not focusing on structural materials, so I'm not going to touch on mass timber, but that's largely because we're not structural engineers. So we tend to not be the people on a project who are determining the concrete, the structural steel, not even the facade. Like really, we're touching different materials than that. So this is a standard that is built on industry norms. This is not a unique set of requirements that Gensler is applying to our projects. This is really built off of the established precedent of programs like LEED or like WELL, the work that the USGBC and ILFI have been doing to really drive sustainable material procurement in this space. And then finally, this is an evergreen standard. So the object of the exercise is not to set a one-time standard and then just hold all of our projects to that. We are going to implement this standard on our projects, and as the market changes, we will shift the criteria to reflect what is actually market leading in like a year or 2 from now. So, okay, I thought it might be helpful to look at it kind of quickly, but so this is a Gensler standard set of requirements for a specific product. You've got the name of the product, you've got its specification division, and then you've also got very cleared out what types of materials it doesn't apply to. So that really helps expedite the process of like, does this product need to meet sustainability requirements, yes or no? And then when you're at the standard level, the expectation is that a product meets all of these requirements, not just one in each category or one of them. It's like a very comprehensive look at a material is expected to have a sustainability action plan at an organizational level. It is expected to have embodied carbon reporting. It's expected to be tested for VOC emissions, which are the way we measure impacts to indoor air, and then expected to have an ingredient disclosure, which tells you the chemical components that are present in a material. It's a way for you to determine if there's anything potentially hazardous in there. And then at the second tier, we've got a whole bunch more options, but the good news is these are optional. They're not a requirement, but this was really an opportunity for us to signal to the market, to manufacturers, to our clients, to our designers, that these are the sorts of things that we see from products that are really leading in a given category. So you'll see things like a much lower global warming potential, which is related to embodied carbon. That's how you measure the embodied carbon of a product. You see things like the avoidance of class-based substances. You see third-party verification of things like recycled content and bio-based content. Yeah, it's more stringent and more ambitious. So these standards went into effect on all of our projects across those 4 regions, as I mentioned, at the beginning of 2024, and then at the beginning of this year, we established criteria for 6 new product categories. And these are all now written into Gensler's specifications. So these are required on projects across these regions. And in addition to like researching and refining and publishing this like huge undertaking to determine what all of this criteria should be, there's a super talented team of people that have been working really hard to train and develop resources for not just our teams, but for manufacturers and contractors as well. Okay, so I think this is pretty huge. One of the largest architecture firms on the planet is now saying that most of the materials that we specify need to hit very specific sustainability targets, but it gets bigger than that. This is like my "but wait, there's more" moment. This effort to drive the specification of more sustainable materials is really part of an industry-wide effort that's being driven by the AIA, the American, I'm going to get that acronym wrong, so I'm not going to say it. So as you can see in this timeline, in 2022, the AIA released the Materials Pledge, which was really like clear guidance on what you should be looking for in terms of sustainable attributes of a material. And then in 2023, there is an organization called Mindful Materials, and they've been working on developing this thing they call the Common Materials Framework. So the idea is to align the industry on how we characterize, communicate, and identify those better materials in a shared language to really expedite the adoption and specification of these products. So that shared language is the Common Materials Framework. What it does is it takes the literally hundreds, like I'm not being hyperbolic when I say hundreds, of like certifications, testing standards, declarations, all of these things that, just get referred to in acronyms, and it gets really soupy and confusing trying to keep it all straight. But, these are the things that tell us if a product is sustainable. And so it takes all of that information and it organizes them into a framework and a structure that really helps us efficiently communicate across all of the parties involved in the manufacturing, procurement, and installation of these materials. So, in other words, our standard fits into this framework alongside other architecture firms, construction firms, consultants, this massive industry, and we're using this alignment and our size and scale to really drive demand for more sustainable materials. And this is resulting in a really remarkable market transformation all up and down the value chain. Okay, so that was just part 1, but that was the longest part. Thank you for going short, Jesse, because I knew I was going to run over. But I'll take you through how we're ensuring that we're driving down emissions during design and construction. So better materials are a great place to start, but not every project is the same, obviously, and the material quantities will vary across your project. And so the way that we track this is through what is called life cycle assessment. For anybody who is not familiar with that term, these are essentially massive calculations of all of the carbon emissions associated with the project. There are a couple of different types of LCAs that sort of measure different parts of a project's life cycle, but for the most part, you're going to have a project that tracks A1 through C4, and then sometimes operational energy and operational water are included or excluded depending on how you're doing this. So to just sort of spend a minute here, if you look at like A1 through A3, the product stage, this is the energy that's emitted to make the product that you're using. The construction phase or the construction stage is the energy or the emissions associated with transporting all of these materials to your job site, then constructing it, then when the building is in use, then repairing items, replacing them, and then eventually its end of life. So it is the full life cycle of a project. And for us, this process really follows the typical design pipeline, and it tracks a project's carbon impacts at these key phases of a project. So, we definitely have milestones that we hit throughout schematic, design development, construction documents, and construction administration. So, from there, we use these quantities from the project model to establish 3 key numbers. We start with the estimated emissions if a project is designed using typical baseline practice. So that's your baseline number. That's usually what you show your reductions against. And then there is the proposed design, which is that top outer ring. So that is the carbon emissions associated with how the building was designed, including all of the strategies that one can employ to reduce carbon emissions on a project. So better materials, reduced material quantities, things like that. And then finally, you typically do a as-built version, which tracks any changes that occurred during construction, which can happen. And so what this allows us to really see is where there are major opportunities and where a project's major impacts are coming from, where we can make the most significant reductions. So if you're looking at this example, like 45% of the project's overall impacts just came from partitions. It came from demountable and solid partitions. So if you can make reductions there, if you can specify better materials, you have an opportunity to save the most carbon in that area. And we are really starting to do this work across more and more of our projects. And this is going to be a very significant part of LEED V5, which is the latest version of LEED. But really where we have another tremendous opportunity to do this is we have clients who have real estate portfolios. They have tons and tons of buildings that they occupy, that they own, and they have design guidelines and standards that say this is how to build my space. And so when we can work with them to combine the approach of specifying better materials and then also doing carbon accounting to understand where you need to make reductions, we really have an opportunity to have significant impact, not just across volume, but across a great many number of projects. I promise I'm getting close to the end. So finally, we've done all of this work to ensure we're selecting better materials, we're tracking their impacts on a project, and then a lease term ends and many of these materials just get demoed and they wind up in a landfill. So now ideally, I think we'd see our practice and our culture really shift towards reusing the materials that are on site, or even reusing materials that are present on site in another location and just not putting them through the process of needing to be recycled and turned back into building materials or downcycled into something else. But we're really not seeing a widespread adoption of this approach. We're seeing a lot of materials go to landfill, and it's even estimated that 60% of the city's solid waste is coming from construction and demolition. So, but this is starting to change. I got the Green Economy Action Plan in there. Especially here in New York, we're really seeing the city get behind circular construction and building a green circular economy. We as an industry are starting to understand that although 75% of a project's embodied carbon comes from the material sourcing phase of the project, there is still 9% of the emissions that are coming from deconstruction and demolition. And when you're talking about a really big project, 9% can be a massive, massive amount. This can be tons and tons, hundreds of tons of carbon. So it's definitely worth it to go after that. And we're also seeing that even increasing the recovery and recycling of these materials in smaller amounts can result in significant carbon savings. So this stat down here that's maybe a little hard to read, even recycling carpet, like 25% of it, if it got diverted from landfill, would be 165,000 tons per year that we would save. So we have really made this a priority to focus on in our practice going forward, because this directly ties into our mission of designing for impact and reducing the emissions from our projects. I'll walk you through what our approach is, but we're really focused on 2 materials at the present time, and that is float glass and carpet tile. So I think thanks in large part to the Durst organization, and Sydney Mainster from Durst is who connected me with this organization. There is an industry-wide or city-aligned effort to increase the diversion of demolished architectural glass. This is mostly going to landfill because there is this misconception that architectural glass can't really be recycled because of the glazing, the coatings, all of these various things. But it can. There are recyclers out there who can have the capacity to recycle these things, and there are manufacturers who want the raw material. So one example of this is Saint-Gobain, who you might also know as Certainteed. They use recycled glass to produce their fiberglass insulation, and by using recycled glass instead of virgin raw material that go into the product, they're able to cut down the total volume of raw material. They're able to reduce the temperature of their furnaces to melt the glass into a thread that they can then spin into fiber. And they're using this to drive down the embodied carbon impacts of the next phase of material that they produce. So, and we're also looking at how to recover carpet tile from landfills, largely because these materials present a similar opportunity to reduce carbon as architectural glass and insulation, but also because the state has really enacted legislation to recover these materials. So there's now, I went too far? No, I didn't. There's now going to be like an influx of these materials that are being diverted from landfill, but it hasn't really been determined where they're going to go and what's going to happen to them. And so I think we're trying to really learn these lessons quickly of how to get them back to manufacturers to drive down the emissions of new material that we specify, and start having this impact now. And the way that we're doing this, we're starting with a really simple way to just identify what materials are slated for demolition that are on our projects. We're currently piloting this form that really is would be included in our demo sets. It contains information about the site, materials, their presence in what quantities, and whether there are any barriers to recycling, like asbestos or lead, present on the site. And then we're also piloting some draft specification language that provides guidance on what to do with those demolished materials that have the potential to return back into the circular supply chain. Okay. So this kind of brings me back to the beginning in a way, and just to repeat, like ideally we would be seeing these materials be reused on site. The goal is to reuse, the goal is not necessarily to divert them from landfill and just to recycle. But this would have such a significant impact on the embodied carbon of our projects, and as we are working towards shifting this practice and our culture, we're not waiting for that single silver bullet solution that could solve the carbon emissions problem. So we're really looking for as many viable opportunities as we can and doing our best to implement them across massive scales. And by taking this approach, we're really able to make the best choices that we can today to ensure that we're driving down the impacts of our projects by tracking performance and then returning materials as a feedstock for new lower embodied carbon products that we then specify on the next project. And this in turn allows us to increase the stringency of our standards, which has a ripple effect throughout the industry and the world. And this is really what we, Gensler, mean when we say we're designing for impact and we're creating a better world through the power of design.
Carrie went over the design. I'm going to go more on the construction front. So I'm Jennifer Urrutia. I'm a project manager at Consigli Construction. Prior to being at Consigli, as a project manager, I dedicated my career to sustainability and transitioned to project management as a goal to help really integrate sustainability with what is happening in the field and where some of these gaps end up happening. So just a little bit about Consigli. It's a 5th generation family run organization originating in Milford, Massachusetts, and then from the acquisition of Lend-Lease grew some cities, but this is Consigli's presence all over the country as well as the Virgin Islands. One really unique thing from Consigli I'm just going to highlight is there's a self-performance department, so to speak, within the company. So we actually, as our employees, have tradesmen that work for us and are able to do carpentry, millwork, any type of labor, as well as concrete. So it allows us to also have more of a direct impact of how some labor is occurring. It's not on every project we have that, but it is a resource that we have internally, as well as an energy modeling company to help reduce the operational energy of buildings, and a lot of involvement as well with Local Law 97. So highlighting a few aspects of sustainability with Consigli before we dive in deeper to more of the embodied carbon conversation. These are actions that we do on site through most of all our projects when possible, but we site separate all the drywall to help make sure that gets recycled, since that's a material that in the landfill emits pretty toxic emissions. So we also do a lot of deconstruction, as Carrie highlighted, making sure we're just reducing altogether what actually is getting sent off the job site into the landfill, and recycling and diverting when possible. A pilot we were doing on job sites, now I'm wondering as well if Jesse was involved with this, but we did battery storage on site for our construction sites, where the battery storage would operate our trailer and any operational energy during construction. So we would have battery storage from solar panel going back into the energy required for us to operate equipment. We electrify equipment when possible. We try to also reduce the amount of diesel getting sent to the job site, so emissions from the job site aren't being generated and we're just using electric. And then on all job sites as well, we track the energy, waste, and water consumption. So by tracking what we're consuming, we're able to then help either improve our energy consumption by electrifying more, or our waste by making sure we're recycling, diverting, or reusing when possible. So that's just what we could do from a construction perspective operationally. It's kind of rare for a company to track as much as we do, but it's one framework the contractor's commitment has really implemented, which is a guide for general contractors to follow in order to help reduce their emissions from a job site. So we'll go into embodied carbon. That's also something that we really focus on with our own internal language. And clean construction practices, a little what Carrie talked about with making sure we have materials on site that aren't harmful, and then also trying to help, mitigate the dust. A lot of what LEED requires, but we just do that standardized. Okay. So also great segue, Carrie talked a lot about the interior materials, where the design team has control over that. So when it comes to us as a general contractor, we don't have the flexibility and ability to really change a lot because it's design based. The aspects that we can control more of are the structural elements. So concrete really being the most exciting opportunity, because there is so much out there that really has been proven to be reliable from an engineering perspective. So one aspect that we have been doing on a lot of our projects is using ground glass pozzolan, which is cement replacement in concrete, helping reduce the emissions, and it's slag and fly ash substitute. So that's something that you could easily do in sidewalk pours. It tends to have a lighter color as well, which is also great for reflectivity and albedo effect. So the color's a benefit as well as the ease. Local batch plants have this available if you request it. USA and Gotham are two locally that you could request ground glass pozzolan to go into your concrete mixes. So sidewalks are very common, as well as foundation. The One Java project in Brooklyn, it's about an 850 square feet building, 750 or 850,000 square feet. The foundation was all including ground glass pozzolan. So it reduced the emissions 40% of the building by having that substitute in the concrete. So it's the ground glass pozzolan, and then Sublime is a little more new-ish. I'm not speaking out of turn about that, but from 2023, it originated from MIT, and a lot of contractors and Microsoft have already signed on to using Sublime. It basically uses a different process. It uses electrolysis instead of a furnace for the limestone, which is where a lot of the energy intensity comes from with concrete. It's just the intensity of, with making the limestone. And then on top of it, building is 8% of emissions from concrete. Focusing on the steel, which is another opportunity for really saving on embodied carbon. EPDs is going to be really valuable if you reference that to figure out exactly where your steel is coming from and the embodied carbon associated. There's other engineering advancing on this. I'm just to speak more generally of what's available right now. And then also one aspect too with, encouraging these alternative methods of, whether it's concrete or steel, you're helping diversify the availability of selections, which I think, is great now with like tariffs really having an impact in construction as well as just local supply chain availability. Helping these, markets grow is going to help diversify with what's available. Material reuse, a lot also what Carrie mentioned. So we want to be able to reuse when possible on site and then also have other organizations reclaim what's on a job site when you're demoing. Two local organizations, Doors Unhinged, who are actually based in Pennsylvania, also reclaim Hafele hardware, but they are up in this corner. And Gensler, I think, works a lot with them. But they, reclaim doors, design them to be for a new building or a new office space. So there's a lot of value in the hardware of doors and doors themselves. So it's a great resource and opportunity to also kind of save there. And then Carpet Cycle is not a manufacturer, Shaw contract, like they take back their carpet. What Carpet Cycle does is they take back any manufacturer, even if it's unknown of who it is. And then they manufacture it to be a part of insulation. So it's wall insulation is what it ends up being. Okay. Those are opportunities from the general contractor of what you could do, what you have control over. I'll get into CLT in a little bit, but from a standpoint of, you have this engineer design, you can also decide then when you're sourcing it and from sourcing it from where. Your subcontractor building it is going to be really critical in all of this. So you need to get their buy-in, but you also need to do some education to make sure they're actually not arguing back, because I think doing something different tends to have a lot of pushback from someone who's never done it before. Luckily, some of the concrete mixes are becoming more common, but there's still a lot of uncertainty, and as a result, some contractors don't want to be involved. It's just kind of like a challenge you deal with, but there's a lot of articles, it follows ASTM standards. There's a lot of backing for supporting these adoptions. And then if, it wasn't specified, find opportunities throughout construction to implement it. So we touched on mass timber a bit with Jesse. He kind of set some of like the regulatory framework of where this is going. A lot of interest in CLT from a design perspective, use perspective. It has lower body carbon. It really is appealing for a lot of reasons. I think in New York it's not very common quite yet because I think we're still figuring out some of like the regulatory concerns, whether it's like a fire related or if it's structurally related. So here's an example of it being used on a recent project of mine where typically too, like if it's wood, it tends to go with like the wood subcontractor. Because of this structural element, it was from the steel contractor who installed it, and logistically it made it a lot easier. These 19 beams were installed in 2 days, which is quite fast, but it just really shows the ease of actually handling this and the preciseness of when you are ordering it, what you're actually getting. Also, so what this is, these are glulam structural beams, and how they're made is not necessarily from scraps, but they're from pieces of wood that get assembled together. So you're also using wood that would otherwise be waste, or maybe to another product, but you're kind of using a waste product to make the beam. And then another benefit too for using CLT is it's a carbon, sink, so to speak, right? It's absorbing carbon, so that just adds as well to the decarbonization carbon benefit of it. And then, it's low maintenance as well. If this was, so this is like, in this case, it's gonna be in a wet environment. If this was steel being painted, it would chip. It would be a lot more maintenance required to maintain it. So one other benefit with the CLT is it is just a natural product and low maintenance as a result. Okay. So both speakers touched upon some of the policies surrounding what's going on with decarbonization as well as circularity. There's a lot of attention from the city, as Jesse highlighted, for figuring out ways to really integrate these methods into practice, whether it's from, a policy standpoint or it's from a guidebook. There's a lot of support locally. There's a lot of, I think, interest in this as a whole and a lot of opportunity that's quite exciting. Okay, so, thank you.
Anyone in the audience has any questions? Yeah.
Question for Carrie. Regarding the software that you guys are building to sort of, you guys have quite an abundant amount of information regarding materials. Is there any plan to sell or share that information? You might have brought it up in your presentation.
No, I didn't touch on that. But part of the common materials framework, is that what you're referring to? Is
Correct.
so that's not us. That's a nonprofit, third-party organization that's working on doing this, and that is the sort of big next phase for them, is to really make a digitized version of all of this information in a way that is publicly accessible. They're doing that through a platform right now called Building Ease.
Okay. So
Yeah.
just branded in such a way that you guys are, I just saw some of the slides.
It's all of those certifications are going through the Common Materials Framework, and we built our standard using their language.
Got it.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay.
I have one.
You have one? Yeah, sure.
Yeah. You said that you guys were doing projects in almost all 5 boroughs. Which borough is missing? Do I not know how Governor's Island is?
Well, I guess Governor's Island technically is Manhattan.
Is it Manhattan?
It is.
Okay.
It is considered
Yeah.
Manhattan, but it's not on the island. of Manhattan.
Okay.
So we actually do have all 5 boroughs represented.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Could you actually maybe elaborate more on? You mentioned the residential building.
Yeah.
That's in Kips Bay. Is it? That's in Manhattan, right?
That's not part of the Mass Timber Studio. That's
Right.
another EDC project. I'm assuming you're referring to. It's called the Spark. It's a kind of healthcare campus.
Mm-hmm.
There's a residential project. I'm trying to remember which. So I guess the biggest residential project is the one on Staten Island.
Okay.
On the Stapleton waterfront, not too far from the ferry.
I was just curious, how many mass timber projects are you seeing in New York that's not part of EDC? And it's only been a couple years since they've been allowed in the city in the first place, too, right?
Yeah, so it's only been a couple years since they've been allowed. Right now, you can't build more than 70 to 80 feet, which 7 or 8 stories, let's say, which sounds low, but most of New York City is not what we're in right now. The outer boroughs, 7 or 8 stories is probably the highest you're going to go anyway. There's not a ton of projects. I was just saying that the fire department was asking me for a site visit of a completed mass timber building. There's not a lot of options to choose from. There's 2 that I know of, both in Brooklyn, both higher end residential. One's a co-op or a condo in Park Slope, and another is a multifamily rental building in Clinton Hill, luxury building. So I think there really are a handful, and then there's a mass timber school, a charter school in Hempstead on Long Island was built with mass timber, but there's not a ton on the private market. I think the city has been doing a pretty good job in terms of the Parks Department, the Brooklyn Public Library has a couple projects. So I think you're seeing more of a push from the public side right now, but private, I think, is getting more interested in it.
Cool, okay, thanks.
You have one more?
Sure, yeah.
Regarding the sourcing of, for mass timber specifically, how do you ensure that it's being sourced properly as opposed to, and you talked about being able to reuse these material, but is there any sort of guidelines to companies? I mean, everyone's out here trying to make a profit, right? Is there anything that prevents them from just harvesting timber as a whole? And is it still sustainable, the better use of material if they're not being regulated as well?
So that's a big question is how it's actually harvested. I don't know how much you guys go into it, but I've heard from kind of forestry experts that there are sustainable ways to do it, and then there's like terrible ways to do it. And a lot of it gets done in the northwest or in the southeast of the U.S. And they're, the top suppliers / fabricators are very much focused on those kind of standards for sustainable harvesting. Because it's a relatively small market of suppliers and fabricators of mass timber, I feel like you're probably getting quality stuff. I don't know, there's a lot, or I haven't heard of a lot of like people doing this unsustainably and getting onto the market. But maybe that will be a challenge later on if the market grows and there's such a demand for it that people will actually will.
Well, if you regulate it too, if you force more buildings to be that with that method, you might start to see that being introduced into the construction development.
Yeah.
Yeah, Austria and Germany are also really big in that market. They have, I think, just more also experience in those areas using mass timber, so it's something that they've already been manufacturing for quite a while. And they could also do longer span beams. I think that's also sometimes the issue with CLT, is the length.
Could you, what is CLT? I don't think we
it's
defined the.
Yeah, it's cross laminated timber.
Right.
Yeah, mass timber, CLT, all of that language kind of has like little nuances to it,
Right.
but good point, there is different language around it. Cross laminated timber is the difference, I guess, where you do get those longer beams. And that selection of supply chain is very low as well.
And I'll also add that there's the Forest Stewardship Council, which is a certification that really tracks whether or not a forest is being properly managed, whether or not their harvesting practices are proper. And when you're doing a life cycle assessment through LEED, in order to count any reduction in carbon emissions from using a biogenic material like mass timber, it has to have FSC certification in order to count that savings. Yeah, so otherwise you're just using the equation that doesn't subtract any carbon that's stored in that wood, and you're not really seeing the savings that you would expect to see from a mass timber structure. And I think a lot of these like sustainable buildings are going for that third-party building certification, so they tend to use that certified wood.
One here and then do.
Yeah, so I was just wondering, does the EDC have any focus on trying to expand their like prefab housing and mass-produced housing kind of industry, or I guess other than housing, just kind of general?
Yeah. I can't think of any investments or programs we have in specifically kind of mass-produced housing. I guess the closest thing to say is because mass timber is fabricated off-site, there is not only like savings, I guess there's less waste, but also buildings can go up faster. So I wouldn't say it's like the modular exactly what you're speaking about, but mass timber has some of those elements to it, but EDC is not very much focused on modular right now.
Yeah, I feel like modular also tends to be from like used in low income housing, I found, just from like a construction perspective. That's typically the market for it. I know, yeah, so Consigli acquired Lendlease. So when I was with Lendlease, they did modular housing in the Bronx. So there are some cases of that.
Nice.
Nice.
Yeah, with the local housing more in the western US, I thought it was a bit more popular out there. So
Yeah, seeing John.
I prefer to have suggestions for Kay and probably one for Jennifer or for everybody. You said that you helping organizations with the life cycle assessment, those organizations pursue LEED certification? It's like, this is why you're doing so, or?
Yeah, partially. I mean, some people do life cycle assessment outside of LEED certification pursuit, but that is one of the credits within LEED certification. So doing a life cycle assessment will get you points towards your LEED certification.
And those are new buildings or existing buildings?
Yeah, both. I mean, it's new construction, it's core and shell projects, there's existing buildings, there's interior design and construction, so you can certify a project that's not ground up, it's just an interior fit out. Yeah, there's a bunch of different rating systems within LEED that focus on the different types of projects that one could do.
I have recently came across a gold certified building. I was just, I wanted to go and see
Yeah,
what they do.
yeah.
It's really thing. And the second
Wait
question.
till you see a LEED platinum.
Oh, there's another question. You mentioned CMF framework.
Yeah.
I missed.
Yeah, Common Materials Framework. Yeah, lot of acronyms in our world. It's really hard to keep them all straight. But the Common Materials Framework is the program, the initiative, I'm not sure what to call it exactly, but the effort that the organization is called Mindful Materials. And they're the nonprofit that I was mentioning before that are really working on finding a shared language so that we're all communicating in the same way and expediting this flow of information.
Right, the last one for Jennifer or for everybody you mentioned is sustainable concrete. Did you come across handcrete?
Yes.
And like, what's your personal, professional opinion about concrete?
Yeah, I haven't used it on any of my projects from experience, but I know, I think in like smaller applications it might have been used.
And also
I don't have-
in Europe, but like
Okay.
I haven't heard, I know that a few startups are doing that here, but I haven't heard about the application.
I think scalability is always the toughest, like getting it to be, you can do it kind of like on singular projects. I think to be able to scale it's a little bit more challenging. So I don't know from experience that specifically. I think I just highlighted more of like what's been more common in the market, but I have heard and read a lot about it. But yeah, I don't know from experience.
There's a future.
I think there's a lot of opportunity, and I think it's been really proven and tested. I think there was hesitancy of like, is this actually going to withstand over time? A lot of these like concrete mixes, right? So I think that's
Could you explain just a little bit what are we talking about?
oh, concrete mixes and using cement replacement to instead. Oh, how did that happen?
I got it. You keep talking.
Yeah. So.
Okay, cool, thanks. Was there a hand over here I saw before?
I have a question.
Oh, yeah, sure.
For any of you. Do you know if New York City is doing benchmarking with other cities in US that are using or have built more in mass timber? For example, I don't know if you have heard about Milwaukee, that have the tallest building in the world, the 25-story building. So New York is doing some benchmarking with those, for example, with that city?
I don't know that we're doing benchmarking. I have heard of the project in Milwaukee. I'd say other cities are probably ahead of New York, or definitely ahead of New York as a general benchmark, but we're not doing any benchmarking specifically. The Mass Timber Studio, I will say, is part of a larger effort nationwide. The U.S. Forest Service partially funds the Mass Timber Studio, and the Softwood Lumber Board, which is kind of the industry body for timber. So the other cities are not only building mass timber, but doing iterations of this studio to kind of push their cities ahead.
Do you know if the Mass Timber Studio, is there like a third round expected, or is the idea once it becomes popularized, once it hits like a critical mass, maybe the studio becomes irrelevant because the knowledge is widespread, and is that basically the
That's a
purpose?
question. That's a question we were literally talking about it in the office a couple days ago. We're trying to figure out. I think mass timber is definitely not scaled up in New York City yet. It's definitely not easy, not the easy option to use. So I don't think we've gotten there yet. Our funders have asked us if we're interested in another round of studio, and we're trying to figure out is another round of studio the best way to push regulatory reform, or is there another kind of method or another approach that EDC can take? So stay tuned in the next couple of months whether there'll be another studio. If you guys know of architects, developers, general contractors that have projects, they could be eligible for the next round.
Cool. So I hand over here. Let's go Gregory and then.
Sure, for all three of you. If there's something you see on the horizon, or realistically would say wish could happen in the relatively near term that would really take your work to like the next level as it relates to sustainable materials.
I think
Sorry, that helps.
Yeah, I think what I'm seeing is a lot of growth in circularity. That there's a lot of like support behind it on the municipal level from organizations like the EDC. That manufacturers are having demand for lower embodied carbon products, and in order for them to do that, they need recycled raw material feedstocks coming in. And so I think that's one of the things that I'm seeing a lot of like interest and growth in, and I think it would really impact the amount of emissions associated with the built environment.
To that point, the city has created very high standards for deconstruction and recycling of construction material. You mentioned about how much of our waste stream is actually construction debris. My colleagues are working something right now. One of the challenges they're finding is really the supply chain. Is there the space to store materials? There's obviously a lot of supply. Is there a lot of people on the other end to take it and to do something with it? And so we're trying. One of the things that EDC can do is kind of convene the right industry players, general contractors, manufacturers, designers, and try to kind of put more support behind the regulations. So having the regulations is one thing, but are there ways that the city's investing in the infrastructure to allow that supply chain to exist? So that's another thing we're working on towards the end of this year.
To get the labor force as well to know how to deconstruct. And I think that's also to maintain its integrity, where you're able to reuse it again, is also challenging. So just all of that coming together for the circularity piece.
Yeah.
Yes. To kind of piggyback off of that question, embodied carbon has kind of been, it's been so much more recognized, and I'm curious about, along with like the regulation and everything with that, what kind of challenges and solutions do you have you guys faced with that?
The one we just built.
Sorry?
Oh.
The one we just built, right? This is.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
This is the one.
Yeah. I started the last one. Somebody else.
I think scalability. Like, I do think there's a lot of opportunities out there. It's just also having, like, where it's being manufactured, to be able to transport it as well to certain sites is a limit. But so I think just scaling it from a national, let's start with the national level, right, or local level as well. But having that be adopted and having more competition to these manufacturers, I think will help. There's all these incubators, they need to come out of the incubator.
I guess related to scalability is, so it seems like embodied carbon is a focus of the kind of the luxury kind of development, and then on the other side actually kind of government, because government is putting out these regulations, they want to follow it. I feel like there's a middle tier of not the luxury and not the public project that may be more cost sensitive and they're worried, or they're more risk averse, and so maybe embodied carbon is not their number one focus, and reaching that like middle tier could be an interesting way to scale up, focus on embodied carbon and reducing embodied carbon.
Yeah. I think it's also a shift in mindset in how we design. I think there's a really big focus on having something new, and I mean, to your point, it's like having something that you associate with being high end, and just like a really like rapid churn of materials. Like even if we specify very low embodied carbon things, if we're cycling through them in a like 3 to 5 year period, that savings is not going to be as impactful as if it's in place for 10, 15, 20, 60 years. I mean, I think that's one of the things we see on the base building side is like, if you build a new building, you expect its lifespan to be about 60 to 100 years. In a city like New York, you're doing interior fit out projects where you're just like turning spaces over very, very rapidly. And so getting folks to, think about where the materials that they're specifying are coming from and where they're going, and really sort of changing their relationship to like needing new materials in their space all the time is one of the big challenges, and it's also one of the like biggest opportunities.
Yep, okay.
I just wanted to understand what's the reason for the like 7 to 8 floor cap on mass timber buildings in New York when other cities are clearly building taller than that? Is it just regulatory?
Yeah, the answer I've gotten from the fire department, and I assume this to be true, so the ladders on the fire trucks are actually going to go up 70, 80 feet. And so as a precautionary measure, that's the highest they want the mass timber buildings to be
Even though
built.
like they're shown to be just as fire resistant as other high-rise buildings made of concrete and steel.
Yeah, I mean, easy to explain that, easy to show the studies, easy to show tests, but because it is a new material for New York City, I think the fire department, the buildings department is being more conservative, more cautious, but we definitely are as part of the studio trying to educate and show how it actually could be safer than concrete and not just concrete and steel, not just in the construction, but obviously in the operational phase of the project.
Thanks.
I guess one more.
I guess I'm just kind of wondering, like, do you find that, I guess, like, what do you think your solution is moving forward with the fire department? Like, do you find that it's kind of easy to get them to change their policy? Is that almost next to impossible? And it's like more worthwhile to focus on other efforts? I guess, kind of, how do you see like changing policy that's kind of based around maybe engineering metrics?
Yeah, I mean, that's the question I think about every day. I'm not on the design side, so I think way more about the political aspect of it, and I think it is a political question. The fire department's job is to keep the city safe, and they respond in emergencies. They're going to do everything they can to make sure, them and the buildings department, to make sure that things are safe. And so they're less interested in the carbon emission savings. They're less interested in this like putting out a new innovative thing. They want to keep people safe. And so I think there needs to be a push either from city leadership, from the fire department leadership, to say this is like the way of the future. We're going to get on board with it. We're going to make this something. So usually there's only political action when there's emergencies. Obviously we don't want emergencies. We don't like, or there's some push from the political leadership that mass timber is the future and we need the fire department to get on board with it. But until that happens, I think it'll be a slower churn. I think the level I'm working at is people kind of the middle tier of the department and slowly getting more comfortable with it. But I think if you want big change, it has to happen really at the top.
I think maybe giving the fire department a European tour, showing them that there's lots of countries that have smaller fire trucks with longer ladders that can go down narrower streets, can reach higher buildings. But yeah, no, it'll definitely take a lot of time.
I should say the people I work with are super interested, super committed to this, trying to learn as much as they can.
Yeah.
They always brag to me about how much they are speaking to European experts and learning about mass timber. But again, the department is huge. They answer to the commissioner and the deputy commissioner, and mass timber is not high on the priority list when their job is keeping people safe and respond. And mostly what the fire department is set up to do is to respond to fires. They think there's less resources towards the regulatory side of things. This also shows up in battery energy storage. So there's less people who are the technical experts. Most of the department are firefighters.
Yeah, over here.
This is a question for everyone. How do you find your clients navigate like cost and benefit? Because sometimes sustainable materials are cheaper and sometimes they're not. How do they balance like their sustainability goals and then also like saving money?
Yeah, it's definitely a topic of conversation that comes up a lot. I think, I can't think of a specific example of a client who's really like sitting down and doing the math between we save, we spend this much on a more expensive product, but then we save in the long term. I think, one of the ways to think about it is if an organization is offsetting their carbon emissions, then that's less carbon they have to offset down the road. But I think, a fair amount of them think that this is an investment in terms of like the, sustainability of their space, the well-being of their employees or whoever it is. We do a lot of workspace, so, less so thinking of it as like tenants in a housing situation, but, more employees, that there is an argument to be made that there's a value that comes from working with these materials, even if they are in some instances more expensive. But I think also, we're starting to see more and more that like there's stuff out there that's really sustainable, that's like cost competitive, that it's not the same price tag that it used to be in a lot of instances.
Any other question over here? Yep.
I'm just curious, I mean, it was alluded to, but obviously sustainable materials is a far broader category than just embodied carbon, and sometimes there's competing interests or valuation criteria, and especially when you start talking about circular design and being able to reuse materials 50, 100 years in the future. Just curious about, I don't know, how you all think about what we're learning in terms of the hazards and toxicity of certain materials, and it's really kind of unknown at this point. There's, tens of thousands of ingredients that just haven't even been tested. Like, how do we kind of keep up on that?
Yeah, it's a good point, and it's why we made the standard really comprehensive, why there are embodied carbon targets and material ingredient disclosure targets and circularity targets. Is like the goal is to not focus on one thing at the cost of others, right? And I think we're finding that, and all of it is very much related. So if you make something out of material, like out of chemicals that are hazardous, the potential for it to be recycled at the end of its life kind of doesn't exist, right? So if you use smarter chemistry to develop a product and you figure out a way in that process to drive down its carbon impacts, and then at the end of its life you can turn it back into something, you've kind of hit that trifecta of like human health, circularity, and embodied carbon. And I think, yes, you're right that there's like, I think there's like 200 chemicals that are on the TSCA, I can never say that acronym, the Toxic Substances Control Act list, and that's out of thousands and thousands that have never been tested. There is thankfully movement towards, essentially non-government bodies tracking what are the hazards associated with these materials. A lot of that work is happening in Europe. And, so there is information available about what some of the potential hazards of these chemicals are, and normally you find that information through an ingredient disclosure, which are becoming more and more common for building materials, thanks to things like LEED that award points to products that have those disclosures. So, yeah, it's and it's tricky because you're also navigating, like, I think more often than not, folks are concerned about it being a hazard to the person that they interact with, who's interacting with the material. They're not really thinking about the upstream and downstream implications of working with these chemicals. So they're not thinking about the people who are making them, who are extracting them, who are processing them, and then who are near the facilities that are experiencing any emissions coming off of these, during production, or their incineration, which is like, can be extremely hazardous depending on what type of products we're talking about. So, I think there is a lot of movement towards understanding that has a significant impact across multiple things that, we care about in relationship to sustainable materials.
Okay, thank you for that answer. I think we'll end it there, seeing it's 8 o'clock on the dot here. So let's give one more round of applause to